tonight, you will sleep.
Welcome, Frodo of the Shire. One who has seen the eye.
The world has changed. 10 years ago, I would have loved a Lord of the Rings TV series, since back then, it seemed we were getting amazing shows left and right, and with Marvel striking it big with the first Avengers, Dread gaining notoriety as an unsung cult classic, Game of Thrones hitting its stride, and the promise of more Star Wars films, the future seemed bright indeed. But many of those once great stories have been lost to the tides of wokeness. And as terrible as those sacrifices were, they united many a Tolkien fan to the horrors Amazon had in store. The Rings of Power. For generations, people have said you can't judge an entire book by its cover alone. But when said cover looks like this, and you've been burned so many times by other fancy covers that have all said the same thing in one form or another for otherwise terrible media, I think it's pretty fair to expect the worst. That's likely one of the big reasons Rings of Power didn't get much fanfare when it was first unveiled. To put it simply, it was a complete shit show, with Tolkien fans calling foul over how blatantly it was disregarding his lore, and the mainstream press decrying anyone who criticized it as racists, sexists, incels, and whatever new watchword they use to demonize classic fans who raise any objection to a story they once loved being reimagined for modern audiences. Despite all of that, I went into Rings of Power with the honest intention of giving it a fair chance. After all, it's pretty well established by now that my favorite show of all time is the 2004 reboot of Battlestar Galactica, which was a radical departure from its original source material in almost every way. I love Lord of the Rings, both the books and Peter Jackson's trilogy, which I consider to be not just great adaptations, but also some of the greatest films ever made in their own right. I even enjoy the Hobbit trilogy more than most Tolkien fans, although you won't catch me defending its bloated length, schizophrenic tone, thin character development, and the Tauriel Keeley romance subplot any day. My point is, I'm not against adaptations that change things from an original story, as long as said changes enhance the overarching narrative and the characters, while also remaining faithful to the original's themes and concepts. If Rings of Power did that, hell, if it just managed to be a decent fantasy show by itself, I'd be willing to give it some credit just for being entertaining. And well, that's not what we got. Rings of Power isn't just a bad adaptation, it may well be one of the worst premieres to a TV series I've ever seen. Even when taken as its own original series, its writing, acting, special effects, and much of the production design gave me PTSD flashbacks to Batwoman. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Rings of Power is split between multiple characters, engaging in their own stories. You've got Galadriel, who henceforth I shall only refer to as Warrior Galadriel, because that's the only thing she has in common with the character J.R.R. Tolkien created, on a journey to slaughter more orcs than the armies of Rohan and Gondor combined, so she can find Sauron and avenge her brother. She'll make that very clear across the first 3 episodes, because that's the only thing she ever talks about with every new person she meets, in usually the most arrogant and condescending way possible. Then you have Elrond, or Femrond as I like to refer to him, working alongside Celebrimbor, although Cuccabrimbor is much more appropriate given the odd exchanges he has with Femrond, to build a master forge with the dwarves, when they're not bickering about missing weddings, trees somehow growing underground with love, and smashing rocks in a pointless dick measuring contest. There's also Arondir, or Don Lemonloss as the internet likes to refer to him, locked in a forbidden love with an herbalist from a village of asshole ex-Morgoth supporters. And finally there's Nori Brandyfoot, who aside from being female, is just a discount Frodo Baggins, on a journey to help a wizard who fell from the sky, which never happened during this time, and is heavily implied to be Gandalf, which would be incredibly stupid, against the wishes of her nomadic tribe of hobbits, or Harfoots as Amazon likes to refer to them to avoid getting sued. although I'd say their culture is more reminiscent of dirty barbaric gypsies when you get right down to it. All these stories are happening at the same time, and the show cuts back and forth between them at random intervals, which ends up being very jarring given their incredibly loose ties to each other and often derails any kind of flow the narrative was building up at that point. Normally, this would be where I break down everything that's happened across these 3 episodes, but the truth is, what I've just described is pretty much the bulk of everything that's occurred across 3 entire hours of this show's runtime. Galadriel spends the first episode narrating how beautiful and perfect the world used to be in the Eldar days, which gets contradicted almost immediately by showing her getting bullied by her peers as a child, like she's Peter Parker late for the school field trip. Her brother steps in to prevent her from slugging the kid who sunk her paper boat, defeating any kind of purpose and message that scene had, and then tells her one of the dumbest metaphors I think I've ever heard in my entire life.
Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot? Because the stone sees only downward.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me.
The darkness of the water is vast and irresistible.
You big, stupid jellyfish.
The ship feels the darkness as well, striving moment by moment to master her and pull her under.
You know, I support religious freedom for all species, but that's just crazy.
But the ship has a secret, for unlike the stone, her gaze is not downward but up, fixed upon the light that guides her.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. Getting a lot of bullshit on this line.
Rings of Power is flooded with pseudo-intellectual gems like this that try to sound deep and thought-provoking, but really come across as embarrassing and childish, next to all of Kingdom Hearts' soliloquies about battling darkness and friends being Sora's power, and especially besides anything written by Tolkien himself. This leads into the current story that takes place after the fall of Morgoth and during the rise of his successor, Sauron, who Galadriel has sworn to find and destroy after her brother died in the attempt, and now roams Middle-earth, belittling anyone who gets in her way, even her own people and supposed friends. You may think I'm exaggerating, but that's literally everything going on with her character across 3 movie-length episodes. Even after she jumps off the ship to Valinor into the open ocean, which she herself admits in the most recent episode that would have been certain death if she hadn't run into Halbrand on his raft, all she cares about is condescending to the Númenóreans so she can get a ship to go back to Middle-earth and butcher more orcs in a selfish crusade. I can't stress just how one-note and unbearable they made Galadriel, who would be an awful character on her own, but is made infinitely worse compared to Cate Blanchett's amazing portrayal in Peter Jackson's films. Femrond wants to catch up with her and see if she's alright. Oh, how dare he try to court her with idle flattery like a politician, instead of the friend he claims to be, even though she treats him like complete dirt in every scene they're together in. She will speak to your manager Shil Gallet, Femrond, and you do not understand anything she's going through. Even though in the prologue she herself said elves fought against Morgoth, and the Elrond we knew absolutely saw his share of battle.
It is only natural to feel conflicted.
Conflicted? I am grateful you have not known evil as I have. But you have not seen what I have seen.
I have seen my share.
You have not seen what I have seen.
It could. Nuh-uh. Yeah. Yeah. Nuh-uh.
Totally not. Sauron offers to help her up on his raft? Nope. All this ungrateful cow wants from him is to take her back to his supposed destroyed homeland, and pretend to care about his alleged backstory when all she really wants to do is kill more orcs at anyone's expense.
I'm afraid you're short an army.
Leave the army to me. Why are you dodging the question?
Why are you stranded at sea?
Because rather than rest in glory, I chose to seek out the very enemy responsible for your suffering.
Do you truly believe seeking him out will satisfy you? That one more orc upon the point of your blade will bring you peace? How many more statues would you add to this path?
If you want to murder orcs and settle the score, that's your affair. But don't dress it up as heroism.
Are you going to tell me where the enemy is or not?
Galadriel is trapped in Númenor, which never happened in the books, and needs a ship back to Middle-earth? Well, from her point of view, the best way to accomplish that is to condescend to the Queen Tamiriel, who never ruled Númenor and also she never met in the books, and insinuate she'd be willing to kill all of them just to get her hands on one ship, even though it was one of their captains who saved her ungrateful ass in the first place.
It is because of the elves that you were given this island. Surely you could spare a few planks and a rudder.
They paid for this isle with the blood of their kin.
What the elf means.
Then if blood be the price of passage, I will pay it. But one way or another, I will depart.
I welcome you to try.
I have no need of your welcome.
That's just a hint of the terrible writing and bad plotting this show has, and it isn't much better in the other plotlines. The greatest conflict Fembron has to face is smashing rocks with his former friend Durin, who acts more like an embittered schoolgirl over the fact he missed his wedding and ghosted him for 20 years, which admittedly is a terrible thing for Fembron to do, but it ends up dragging down Khazad Dûm, the best part of the show visually, into an awkward soap opera. All of that takes place in the second episode, and while not as aggravating to watch as the escapades of Galadriel, I wouldn't exactly call it good or up to the standards of anything bearing the name Lord of the Rings. Arondir's plot centers around orcs flooding into the lands he and the other elves have been guarding for centuries, which honestly could have been the most interesting plotline in this series if he didn't have the personality of a stale piece of bread, or if every other scene didn't have obnoxious allegories bombarding the viewer like bricks through a window.
Oh, let it go, knife ears. It's a bloody patch of grass.
Need something? I don't generally talk to strange elves who wander in here. I don't know you. Why shouldn't I have something against you? We've got enough strangers overrunning us. Nothing but trouble.
When are you people gonna let the past go?
Past is with us all, whether we like it or not.
Believe me, I wish I didn't have to talk about modern-day politics in a Lord of the Rings TV show of all things. But when it's as blatant as having a racist Dragon Age NPC tell him to forget the past, his one-note friend warned him how other interracial romances always end in tragedy, and the pale orcs whipping him and his other chained-up friends to do work for them blame the writers for their lack of imagination or any degree of subtlety. Even when you put all of that aside and just look at the character by himself, there's nothing to Arondir beyond being an elf who loves a human. It also doesn't help that his romance with Bronwyn is 10 times more awkward and wooden than any exchange Anakin and Padme had in Attack of the Clones, with the two of them only having one conversation that doesn't revolve around pushing the plot forward or delivering dry exposition of the blatantly obvious.
I've not seen this flower since I was a child. Where did you find these?
I had to trade with another healer who was passing through. We crushed the petals to form a salve.
You crushed them?
Gently.
We used to lie out on the sand and let the sun dry us, and try to guess the names of the birds singing.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
Say what you wish to say.
I have said it already. 100 times over, in every way but words.
Bronwyn is also a flat character whose only defining traits are being an herbalist and single mother to her annoying, Morgoth-worshipping son, Theo. That's everything the first episode establishes about them, making it next to impossible to get invested in their romance or their journey to the next village the orcs ransacked. They split up at the beginning of episode 2, with the only notable thing happening in their storyline is Bronwyn proving how much of a girl boss she is, in the dumbest way possible, to her village, so they actually do something about the orcs terrorizing their nearby lands, while Arondir takes center stage in the bargain basement hack rendition of Elves Unchained. By episode 3, it's confirmed that he and his entire company of elves are massive idiots. Not just because they all got captured, even though they were supposed to have left the area by now, but also due to the fact the orcs were digging this massive trench right by the village they were supposed to be keeping watch over, and they somehow failed to notice this massive scar on the earth from any of their patrols or from their watchtower across hundreds of years. At this point, I'd say the orcs are completely justified in paper cutting all of these elves to death for being so lazy and stupid, especially when their plan to not cut down an elder tree in their way is to insult the orcs and hope it doesn't backfire, which it does in spectacular fashion. And this isn't even the biggest plot hole in this show. To my surprise, the only storyline I was semi-interested in was Nori's, although that mainly comes down to the actress's enthusiasm and not so much the writing she's given. Out of the 4 major characters, she's the only person with something resembling a personality and motivation, by being the only half-foot willing to venture outside their makeshift village and wonder what the rest of the world is like. But, like I said earlier, it's just ripping off Frodo's arc, and it was completely made up by the showrunners, since Tolkien established the hobbits never did anything during the Second Age. It also gets annoying how every character, from her best friend Poppy, aka Discount Sam, to her mother, to Static Burrows, aka Discount Bilbo, constantly go on about how adventurous, inquisitive, and untraditional she is, rather than showing the audience those traits through her actions, or giving any deeper context for why she acts that way. By the 3rd time Poppy points this out after she helps discount Gandalf, it became clear the writers were beating me over the head with their message because they didn't trust the audience to pick it up for themselves, just like every other plot point in this show. Speaking of the Harfoots, it also felt like the writers were going out of their way to make them as unappealing as possible, between their dirty appearances, disgusting eating habits, nonsensical culture, and how all of them, besides Nori's father, are completely dismissive of her curiosity towards the outside world. Which begs the question how Nori's mother knows what elves, men, and dwarves get up to if they spent their entire lives staying out of sight and keeping together. Still, her interactions with Discount Gandalf in the first 2 episodes weren't as aggravating as I expected. It's established that he can't speak English and wants to get somewhere, but he may have ulterior motives Nori doesn't know about, and his magic's proven to be a destructive force to things around him. It's the typical mystery box setup I've come to expect from J.J. Abrams alumni, but I wouldn't say I hated it as much as everything else in the first 2 episodes. Then episode 3 happened, and oh god did it sap away any interest I had in the Harfoots. I'm glad I waited till episode 3 to start reviewing this show, because now that I have the proper context, I can confidently say the Harfoots are just as bad, if not worse, than the orcs. I want everyone to pay close attention to what they're saying in this scene.
Nobody goes off trail. Nobody walks alone. That's right. Nobody goes off trail. And nobody walks alone.
Everyone got that memorized? Well, in episode 2, Nori's father gets his foot broken through strange circumstances, and is worried he and his family will get left behind. Now what do you mean by that, you may ask? Weren't the Harfoots just chanting how they don't leave anyone behind? As it turns out, they do, and that chant is a complete and utter lie. During episode 3, Discount Bilbo recounts all the names of the Harfoots they abandoned in a festival, the ones who were attacked by wolves, caught in a landslide, which is implied to have killed Poppy's entire family, or merely stuck in tall snow, and then chant "We wait for you," even though they're all dead because they got left behind. They even have the gall to make fun of one Harfoot who got stung to death by bees. I wish I were making that up.
Lovo Bulger book. Bees.
We all loved him, but he wasn't Aegis.
We wait for you.
Judging from what Nori's father said, if you pose even the smallest inconvenience to the supposed tight-knit group of people, they'll drop the dead weight the first chance they get. Who would have thought Frodo and Sam, the noble, virtuous hobbits who saved all of Middle-earth, were actually descendants of a group of savages who practiced the Nazi death march? The show tries to pass it off as a somber moment of remembrance, but the truth is, these backwoods gypsies have proved themselves to be more ruthless than the orcs portrayed in this very episode. Adding on to the shit pile, Discount Gandalf burns the map he needed to find his stars, proving he's not nearly as smart as I originally gave him credit for, and then reveals to the camp that he knows Nori. At first, the Harfoots are all for banishing her, but they decide the more humane thing to do is to stick her entire family at the back of their caravan to ensure they get left behind.
Wait, what?
Yes, you heard that right. The society this show wants to portray as kind-hearted and free-spirited just agreed to leave this girl and her family to die behind them, with no one bothering to help her injured father carry their caravan as they struggled to keep up. You know, I have to give the writers some credit. I never thought their pointless side story about hobbits would end up destroying my perception of them so thoroughly in just the span of the entire opening to Fellowship of the Ring. That has to be a new record for character assassination. And the sick part is, it's not even the worst example in this show. The one thing you can count on Rings of Power to nail isn't good action, compelling drama, or decent world building, but how thoroughly it can undermine its own premise and the journey of its central character. And it all comes back to Galadriel and Elendil. Now, to be clear, I don't think every show needs to be a grand Odyssean epic right out of the gate. I'm a big fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Star Trek Deep Space Nine, both of which didn't have the best first seasons, and their special effects haven't exactly aged like fine wine in all these years. I've noticed that's becoming a popular defense for Rings of Power and other lackluster modern shows. That, oh, these first few episodes have been outright terrible, but we can't judge them so harshly because the rest of the show is still coming out, and many shows, like the two I mentioned earlier, arguably don't get good until the end of their first season or towards their second and third seasons. While there is some truth to that, I'd argue both DS9 and Buffy laid out a stronger foundation for developing into better shows than Rings of Power has across 3 hours of their runtime. The distinction between them and Rings of Power is that Sisko's crew and Buffy's Scooby Gang had already been well established by that point. We'd gotten to know most of them on a deeper level than just a Starfleet officer or high school student, so it was possible to care about their safety when they're thrown in dangerous situations. And both shows didn't have their characters stand around delivering dry exposition to each other about the most basic traits in every other scene. Despite having silly episodes, there was still enough competent storytelling to hold the audience's attention and push them to see where storylines like Buffy's growth into becoming a full-fledged Slayer and Sisko discovering the true nature of the prophets and what lay beyond the wormhole would go, which both paid off immensely by the end. In Rings of Power's case, there was practically nothing compelling me to see more, beyond learning if Galadriel can become even more unlikable and if the dialogue would improve. Needless to say, Episode 3 proved neither would be getting any better. No, it only got worse by showing how barbaric the Harfoots really were and giving Elendil the good old Jake Skywalker Last Jedi treatment.
The past is dead. We either move forward or we die with it.
For those of you who haven't read the Silmarillion, this would be the equivalent of Moses saying, "Pfft, why should I care about saving my people? They can die, and all our beliefs and traditions can go with them." I'll say this much about Elendil, at least he wasn't turned into a wayward dropout like his son Isildur. But then again, if I had to live by this phrase, I can understand why he doesn't think much of becoming a sea captain.
The sea is always right!
The sea is always right!
And the sea is always right.
I'm sure you can tell by now these writers aren't Oxford scholars by any stretch. Getting back to how this show completely undermines its own existence, Galadriel and Elendil ride out to Numenor's Hall of Records, in a dragged-out slow-motion sequence Zack Snyder would be proud of. Once they arrive, Elendil finds a scrap of paper one of their spies who escaped from Mordor left there that pretty much outlines Sauron's entire plan of turning Mordor into his new base of operations. And the mark Galadriel has been chasing all this time was Mordor all along, even though you can obviously tell once you put them side by side, but the writers made it light up again just to hammer home how much they don't trust your intelligence. Yes, that's right, Warrior Galadriel, Scourge of the Orcs, Commander of the Northern Armies, every other stupid thing she said to rip off Daenerys Targaryen's famous line, never thought to look at a map and realize the mark she was so obsessed about was Mordor, a land she knew already had a dark reputation in the past. And neither did anyone else in Numenor for God knows how many years that piece of paper's been sitting in this tower. So yeah, to all the people saying just wait till the show's finished to really begin judging it, I'm not seeing why I should be invested in a story that requires everyone to be massive idiots or complete assholes in order for every plot point to occur. Even when you put aside the terrible writing and horrible characterization, this show has nothing else going for it. Between the lackluster visuals that range from decent to holy shit, this billion-dollar show looks worse than The Two Towers, which came out over 20 years ago on 1/3 the budget, the poorly choreographed fight scenes that barely pop up across each dragged-out episode, and the mostly generic score, which pains me to say as a fan of Bear McCreary's work on Battlestar Galactica, but outside of the theme for Numenor, everything else is completely forgettable. and could easily belong to any other fantasy story. My biggest takeaway from Rings of Power is that it's not just a bad show, but it has no identity of its own. All throughout my time watching the first 3 episodes of Rings of Power, I mostly saw places, people, and things that looked like they've been taken straight out of Dragon Age, The Witcher, Game of Thrones, and Elder Scrolls, with the names of Tolkien characters haphazardly thrown in for good measure. Which is funny when you think about it, considering almost all of modern fantasy takes direct influence from Tolkien's mythology. Once you strip away the name Lord of the Rings from Rings of Power, it's yet another poorly made bargain-basement knockoff that tries to emulate Tolkien's success but fails to understand all of the components that went into making Lord of the Rings a successful and enduring story. It wasn't through forcing in obnoxious girl bosses, one-dimensional hobbits that belong to a barbaric culture, or flat characters in general who mainly exist just to push thin allegories and dry exposition. It's mainly because Tolkien's Middle-earth is a fantastical and fully realized setting, one that enhanced a simple yet captivating story about good versus evil, nature versus industrialization, the close bonds people develop as they go through harrowing experiences together, and the strength and will good men are capable of when pitted against overwhelming odds. Those are all universal themes that have existed in stories for centuries. And they're still relevant today because they're all tied to the things we see and experience on a daily basis. Maybe not directly through an evil ring trying to corrupt us, or a Dark Lord using legions of orcs to take over the world, but people can certainly relate to Frodo's arc through their trials of overcoming addiction or living with PTSD, and that's the true power of the story. It's not about seeing yourself as a 3-foot-tall hobbit walking barefoot through beautiful New Zealand landscapes, but being able to empathize with the struggle of an optimistic yet tragic young person, forced to leave behind the home he loves in order to defend it and the people he cherishes around him, while also carrying the heaviest burden in the world that's slowly destroying his good nature, but he presses forward anyway because he knows if he fails, then everything he cares about will be lost with him. Many have argued over the years that Lord of the Rings was meant to reflect Tolkien's experiences during and after the World Wars, but I'd argue that's looking at the story in the wrong way. I'm sure he used aspects of his real-life experience to craft the story, like any other writer, but boiling Lord of the Rings down to shallow allegories, endless orc fights, and recognizable fantasy tropes like Rings of Power did is kind of missing the entire point behind why it was made. Lord of the Rings itself isn't an original story, but it's the way it uses those recognizable tropes and enduring themes in tandem with its rich setting to tell its story about a group of compelling heroes doing everything they can to save this world. That's why so many people loved those books for years, and why Peter Jackson's film trilogy, in spite of all the changes it made to certain plot points and characters, are still celebrated 20 years on, and can at least be appreciated by the most die-hard Tolkien purists for introducing new people to his creations. Even the Hobbit trilogy, which definitely indulged a little too much in the orc fights and fantasy tropes, still had enough genuinely good moments and callbacks to Tolkien's themes that people could still appreciate beneath all the bloat and overabundance of CGI. But Rings of Power has nothing. Not one part across the 3 hours I spent watching this show felt like it truly belonged in the Middle-earth I loved reading about and watching for so many years. Rings of Power just feels like soulless content shoved out by a billion-dollar corporation that just wanted to replicate Peter Jackson's success without understanding how he earned it. It's filled with the same overblown visuals that's meant to show off the technology rather than enhance the story it's attached to, dull action set pieces that feature flat and underdeveloped characters that might as well just be meat puppets, and forced cliffhangers that completely fall flat because after seeing them so many times in so many other lackluster projects, an attentive audience already knows nothing important is going to happen until the very end, and the mystery itself isn't worth investing in if you don't care about anything surrounding it. Galadriel and totally not Sauron aren't going to be stuck in Numenor after episode 3, and he's obviously going to be involved with the forge Cucca was talking about, since the writers have already established his odd fascination with forging as he goes on his inverse Aragorn arc and forced romance subplot with Galadriel that'll be just as creepy and out of place as Raylo. Nori and Discount Gandalf don't have anything to worry about since they're all new characters, and this show's confirmed to be running for 5 seasons, so obviously they're going to play a major role in the overarching plot in some way. It's too early to tell where Elendil and his family's stories will go past episode 3, but I can definitely say the show hasn't gotten me interested to see more of their family drama. And Arondir still has his forced romance with Bronwyn, so I doubt Adar is going to do anything major until they reunite. So, to sum up my thoughts, Rings of Power is a painfully generic and terribly conceived fantasy show, on top of being a total bastardization of Tolkien's mythology. I'm not even sure who this series was made for, because it's too slow-paced and uneventful for anyone looking for a popcorn fantasy adventure show, lacks the epic scale and immaculate detail from Peter Jackson's films, and it'll give book purists aneurysms across every scene. It's just plain bad, so watch at your own risk if you're that morbidly curious. I was pissed off when Amazon cancelled their Elric of Mount Benet TV series a few years ago, but now, I'd say we Elric fans dodged a massive bullet if Rings of Power and Wheel of Time are what we can expect from all their adaptations of classic fantasy stories. I typically don't like boiling down movies, shows, or games to just an arbitrary number, but if I had to give Rings of Power a score, it would be a 2 out of 10. A billion-dollar disaster whose writing is on par with the CW's Batwoman. And just like with Batwoman, now that I'm in, I'm committed to see just how much worse this train wreck will get. So, if you're interested in following along in my journey, stay tuned for more Rings of Power reviews. Thanks for watching. I'm the Elusive Eye, signing off.